offense is in relationship to the end zone. So let's just say that Nethercutt is trying to attack this direction, and the end zone is where you would assume the end zone is. Is he close to the end zone? No, he's pretty far from the end zone. We would consider this to be the long field. There are a lot of different terms that you can use to describe this distance. But one of the things that we like to do in North Carolina and the United States Ultimate is identify in a long field that our marking angles may be very different than our marking angles in a short field or very near the end zone. Okay, so the biggest threat to our defense's success in where Nut is right now is what?
The end zone.
Downfield in a deep throw, right? Our job on defense is to prevent scores, and the quickest way for them to score is a very far throw, right? So I may want to challenge on the mark his ability to complete that pass by being flatter, and instead of having my angle maybe a traditional sort of I'm forcing flick, I may actually try to flatten out the mark and make it where I have to choose based upon our team's selection whether or not I'm taking away more of the flick or taking away a little bit more of the backhand. All right? But either way, I have flattened my mark instead of here or here. If I am here, am I challenging his huck? No. I'm not making a deep throw very difficult for him. But if I'm here, I can more adequately challenge that. So as he holds it in quick grip, I can look at the grip as a mark and know that that is what's called oftentimes in our world the shown throw, and try to prevent him from just being able to complete it as a standstill without having to make an additional move. I would consider it a success in a long field as a mark to force my thrower to pivot, right? Or to throw these outside curving routes instead of a direct shot. So if I can force the thrower to pivot, then I've probably eliminated some of the timing required in completing a deep pass. Okay. Conversely, if Nethercutt is Nut's facing this way, we got a pretty short field. We might find ourselves leaving this flat mark and coming to a little bit more of an angled mark. And our team is no longer concerned, in some cases, especially if we're very, very near the end zone, about passes that go behind the defender, right? In most cases, those defenders will start to front. My teammates will start to front their assignments. Looping throws are very challenging to complete if you only have 20 meters to work with. So I may end up being more concerned about supporting my teammates downfield, because if they're not worried about deep space and they're fronting, what are they worried about?
The back.
Does anybody know? In a short field, we're 20 meters, we're 10 meters.
Breaks.
Lateral movement, right? So it makes sense for me as a mark to support my team in what is most concerning to the downfield players by trying to eliminate lateral movement by the angle of my mark. Does that make sense to everyone?
Of course.
In a short field, you don't really have deep space to work with. So your biggest advantage is moving it across the field to change angles. In a long field, you can score by throwing it deep a lot easier. So what we're trying to do is actually force them to go laterally, right? Instead of gaining those yards. Whereas in a short field, that angled mark, they may still be able to go laterally, but we sure are challenging it a lot more, right? And that's where the whole defensive system adjusts. Since our mark changed, as Goose mentioned, so does what's happening downfield. They're no longer playing normal kind of even or back hip defense. A lot of times they'll be denying the underneath space. So the mark and the defenders adjust to both be doing complementary things.
And the last thing I want to mention about marking is that, and Nut mentioned this earlier as a thrower, as a way of abusing a mark. is he wants to sometimes stand upright so that the mark will mimic that. A lot of times downfield, people will end up doing the same sort of mimicking. But my strength as a mark is going to be putting myself in a position to move laterally very quickly. Right? And there are a couple of ways to do that. Anytime we talk about accelerating or decelerating, that's always going to take place from a low hip position. We can run fast with high hip positions. If we want to change direction, it's always going to be with low hips. So on the mark, I'm going to have to expend some energy. Instead of being up here, I'm going to have to be down here to cast that big shadow effectively. Another thing that I teach athletes to do is something that I don't find to be very common. It's to not just be in an athletic position, but widen your feet and draw your knees in just a little bit. Does anybody know why that might be effective?
Reactivity on the movement.
You push with the inside foot.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is have effective shin angles. Your shins dictate which way you move. If I put force into the ground like this, where am I going to go? I'm going to jump, right? If I put force in the ground with my foot at this angle, where am I going to go? Forward. If I want to go side to side, I'm going to want to have my shins at advantageous angles so I can push off with just one big push or a little hops or something like that. But if I have my shins upright, I'm going to have to rely on bouncing to be able to get lateral movement. It's just not as efficient, it's not as effective. So commonly we will teach wide feet, knees drawn in just a little bit, and there are different strategies with arms that it's just whatever you want to do. If you want to take away as much space visually as you want, or as you can, do it. There's some trickery involved with this sort of thing. That's up to you to decide. But I think we all need to teach balanced marks with very little leaning, and we need to teach wide stance, low hips, and probably advantageous shin angles. Make sense?
We had a question earlier about marking and denying throwers.
Yep.
Remember what it was?
Some of them was spacing.
Yeah, exactly.
About people that were very good throwers, how to go about on the mark, challenging them,
Yeah.
or limiting them as much as possible.
Was it specifically the shimmy?
Exactly. I was in particular with the shimmy movement, but if you can teach me how to defend on beautiful throwers, it's okay. The same, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, the shimmy's tough because the reason so many people use it is because it's really hard to deal with, because it's such a minimal movement. It has usually a kind of a maximal reward in terms of it happens so quick that if he doesn't respect my initial movement, a lot of times I can just go and step out and pivot. And if he does, I usually get a counter space, which makes that obviously hard to deal with as a mark. Because as a mark, you have to make that decision fairly quickly. A lot of it is watching film is a very helpful way, and knowing what people prefer. Like with Ashlyn 9 times out of 10, Ashlyn Joy on Revolver is going to shimmy for his inside flick. So you can train your brain enough to actually not bite. You're usually in a pretty good scenario. The problem is he's extremely good at it, so even if you're planning on not doing it, you still get caught in instinctual mode a lot responding to it. Jimmy is the same way. Jimmy's good, like Jimmy shimmy as they call it, right? And creating that window for him to throw a flick. Most people know he's generally going to try it. He's still good. Well, he's also rangy, so that makes it tough. But the reason they're good at it and such great players is because they're good at getting the things they want often. So a lot of it comes down to kind of what that thrower's skill is. If that's thrower like Ashlyn, for instance, likes to break his inside flick, the best way to deal with his shimmy is to flatten out. Right? You're more worried about his shimmy and inside flick, and if you flatten out, even if you overcorrect here, right? And it's also talking about how you react. Goose's best option to kind of really deny this space isn't trying to pivot and stop me from his backhand, right? If he knows my preferential shimmy to inside flick is what I want, right? Instead of moving laterally or even negative here, Goose, if he does react, should try to train himself to react backwards, right? So that way if he bounces off, you see this inside window is still difficult to deal with. I have an opportunity to throw it around and inside, but he's bounced off in a lot of ways, which makes that angle hard. So generally, like, one of the best ways, if you want to deny inside breaks, is bouncing off. Bouncing off with a round breaks, generally, it can help you, but it's harder with flicks. You bounce off in a flick around, it's such a big inside window, and often with taller people, Jimmy will just throw over you. A lot of players will just throw their flick over you. So you bouncing off and